In today's ultra-competitive business world, being a successful entrepreneur or business owner can be very challenging. Fortunately, contemporary times have blessed us with resources for tackling those challenges and getting us to success more quickly than we could have imagined. Welcome to The Root of All Success with the Real Jason Duncan, a podcast that explores how the world's most powerful entrepreneurs grow incredible companies. This podcast looks at the 5 keys to unlocking success as an entrepreneur. A successful educator turned entrepreneur, Jason's mission is to use his gifts of teaching and leadership to help others get the results they want out of life. Join Jason every week and learn the keys to grow a truly successful business.
Hey there, welcome back to another episode of the Root of All Success podcast with me, the Real Jason Duncan. This is where we interview the top entrepreneurs in America about how they got to success, how they grow incredible companies. And I've got this theory that there are 5 keys to success that every entrepreneur uses to get to success. And after years of casually and formally interviewing these successful entrepreneurs, I found out that there's really these 5 things that show up every single time. And so this podcast was born out of this. Well, let's test this theory on camera and on microphone with some amazingly successful entrepreneurs. Generally speaking, the podcast, we only interview people who started their own business, not a family or business or franchise. Generally speaking, they have about $10 million or more in annual revenue with the business they started, and they've earned and built a net worth, personal net worth of at least $5 million or more. And our guest today fits right within those categories, and you're going to be really excited to hear his story. He's a great friend of mine, and one of my personal advisors. Love meeting with this guy. So I'll tell you about him in a minute. But let's talk about where we are. So this podcast is syndicated by the C-Suite Radio Network, and so it goes out to all of the podcast players. So you might be listening on iTunes or Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you're listening. Thank you for joining in, and thank you to the C-Suite Radio Network for syndicating this show. Also, if you're listening to this on audio only, you're missing out. You really should go and watch this on YouTube because we film this live and in person at the Standard at the Smith House in Nashville, Tennessee, in the Matador Room on the 3rd floor. This is 18,000 square feet of Southern sophistication and style. It's one of the top 5 cigar bars in the country, one of the top steakhouses in Nashville. I'm honored and privileged to be a member here and friends with the proprietor, the one and only Joshua Sterling Smith, who's kind enough to let us use the Matador Room for recording these episodes. So if you're ever in Nashville, you really need to hit me up on LinkedIn or Instagram at the Real Jason Duncan, and maybe we can meet up for a cigar or a nice glass of bourbon here in the Matador Room, and you can see live and in person where we film and record these podcasts. So thank you for joining me today. So before we get into the episode, I want to tell you that this episode is sponsored by Results University. Go check it out at resultsuniversity.org. Results University is the world's premier online educational platform for entrepreneurs and business leaders. There are over 27 courses and over 300 lessons that are in entrepreneurship, leadership, sales, financial literacy, and there's even elective courses in spirituality and faith. It's designed as an 18 to 24-month program to take people just like you, aspiring, eager, ambitious entrepreneurs and business owners, to learn everything you need to know to start, launch, grow, scale, and even exit a business successfully. And that's what the courses are designed to do. And why would you go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a traditional college degree that you may or may not ever need, and you're going to be in debt forever trying to pay that thing off for a fraction of the price? A fraction of that price, you can enroll in a university like Results University and get a world-class entrepreneurial education, and that's actually going to give you the skills and tactics that you need to succeed. So I've got a special offer for those of you who are listeners to the podcast. You can go to resultsuniversity.org/root, as in root of all success. So that's resultsuniversity.org/ROOT. And I've got a special tuition discount for any listener of the podcast who wants to enroll as a student in Results University. We have 3 different levels that you can enroll at depending on what type of experience you want. We've got everything from just access to the courses online all the way up to getting your very own personal business coach for the entire duration of your experience in the university. So go to resultsuniversity.org/root, and we want to thank Results University for sponsoring this episode. All right, that's enough of that. Let's get on with the show. Today, I want to talk about a good friend of mine and a guest who's sitting across the table from me here at the Matador Room. And this guy, born to hippie parents in San Francisco in the 70s, Went on to become nominated as a Rhodes Scholar right out of high school. Graduated high school a year early. Got drafted right out of high school to be a pitcher for the Colorado Rockies. Got a full baseball scholarship to Stanford University right out of high school, but ended up deciding to go to the University of Oklahoma, where he played baseball, learned how to sell books, which is going to be part of his story. We'll talk about that in a moment. And went on later to get a law degree and has worked in some amazing firms and worked for other attorneys and judges, and now owns and operates a company that provides advice to people who are high net worth individuals, executive business owners, et cetera. And we're going to talk all about that. And this guy is Jason Weiss, my good friend. So there's two Jasons on the podcast today. There's Jason Weiss, and there's me, the real Jason Duncan. So Jason, thank you for being here today.
Likewise, Jason, good to be here.
We've known each other for a little while now, but even some of these details that I dug up for this, I did not know the hippie parent thing in San Francisco, and tell us about that story.
Well, yes. I mean, if you go to San Francisco State in the late 60s, I don't think you had another choice other than me hippie parents. I still remember, though, I'll fast forward the story. I was in high school. My dad showed me kind of where he grew up and things like that. I went to the Berkeley campus and I said, wow, there's a sign that says recycle or die. Do they mean that? And he goes, they do. And then it was my introduction to kind of the culture back then. But no, they were in the thick of it, the 60s. I think my mom infamously dated the Rolling Stones editor at the time. And yes, they were true in that culture, hippie parents from the 60s.
All right, so how did the hippie parents turn out such an amazingly gifted and intelligent kid who could be a Rhodes Scholar nominee, graduate high school early, and an amazing athlete, pitcher for the Rockies right out of high school? How did that happen?
You know, I think they looked at things the same way I looked at things now. They looked at things very pragmatically. They didn't see too far ahead in the future. And as kind of hippies, you live in the moment, so to speak, is they didn't get too far ahead with planning. And I think that's one of our kind of curses and things. We get too far ahead. We don't live in the moment and see the moment for what it is. So I've always had this unique ability to kind of see the moment, not get too far extended, and just really live in that space and kind of thrive in that space.
So when did you first remember playing baseball? Because that's a big part of your story.
Yeah. So again, back when I grew up, there wasn't all these leagues and everything else. So we lived on, after they became hippies in San Francisco, they left kind of the Bay Area, this is an interesting story. They thought they were going to Oregon. And we started driving to Oregon, and our car broke down in a place called Grass Valley, California, which is near Lake Tahoe. So the car broke down. So I go, I guess we should live here. So that's where I grew up, and that's how I ended up there. So we found this acreage, 5 acres, but it was part of a larger subdivision. And my brother and I, for just something to do, we'd grab rocks and throw it to the furthest tree out there. And who could hit a tree? And who could hit this tree? Well, that wasn't quite baseball, but little did I know, it was building up my arm strength. So as I got to high school, I started pitching. Now, I wasn't the most accurate pitcher. I definitely was the most accurate pitcher. I could not, there wasn't accuracy, was not my skill, but I had a very strong arm. Again, this is kind of the Forrest Gump approach to how we took things. I just took one thing after another. And next thing I know, I started pitching, and college coaches started coming out, and other people coming. And sure enough, that's what led me to be drafted in my senior year in high school.
So right out of high school, senior high school, graduated a year early, but you get drafted by the Rockies to go play. Plus, you get this Stanford scholarship to go play baseball. So how did you end up making the decision what to do about all that?
So yeah, that's a great thing. So my parents being kind of more the hippie generation, anti-establishment, if you will. Kind of the establishment was never in my purview. Like I didn't even apply to a college, I don't think, until late into my senior year. I want to say probably I was graduating, and when I put my first college application, I thought I was going to the local junior college the whole time. Just that's what you do. So I get drafted professionally, and my coach comes in and says, my high school coach, and says, hey, Jason, you've got very good grades. I see we're talking about nomination for a Rhodes Scholarship. Where are you going to college? And I said, well, I was thinking about the junior college down the street. He says, have you thought about a 4-year college? And I said, not really. He goes, can I make a couple calls for you? I said, sure, why not? Do whatever you want to do. So makes a couple calls, calls me into the office. And calls me into the office, I want to say the middle of June. Now, remember, I graduated probably 2 or 3 days. I've already graduated at this point in high school and not know where I'm going. He sits down and he goes, I've got 2 colleges that are very interested in talking to you. Stanford University, who wants to offer you a scholarship based on being drafted and your grades and whatnot. and the University of Oklahoma wants to take a look at you. I go, oh, well, that sounds great. He says, the reason why they want to, they were in the College World Series last year. That meant nothing to me. And I said, first of all, no to Stanford. That's across the street from me. That's like going in your backyard. What's Oklahoma like? He goes, let's take a trip out there. So I've never been in an airplane, never done any of that. So I went out to Oklahoma. And sure enough, out there I met Barry Switzer. I met Brian Bosworth. They just happened to be there at the time. So I fly home and I say to my parents, I'm choosing education. They go, that's wonderful. And I said, I'm going to the University of Oklahoma. And that's kind of how I got to Oklahoma.
Oh my goodness! Now in Oklahoma, you had a degree, you've got a degree in law, but that didn't happen necessarily at Oklahoma. You got a degree in business, right, at Oklahoma? Is that correct?
So the first 3 years of being in Oklahoma is you're an athlete at Oklahoma. So I don't even know if I had a major, and if I had a major, it wasn't something I was majored in. So my junior year, I was pitching still, and I got hurt my junior year. So at that point, baseball and me were having a crossroads. I was hurt, I couldn't play, but at the same point as I wanted to be a college student at that point.
Yeah.
And baseball was done with me, but I happened to be done with baseball too. We fortunately got to go to 2 College World Series when I was out there. We won a national championship when I was out there. So baseball had been good to me, but I got to be a senior at the University of Oklahoma, which was fun.
So how did the book selling come in?
Yeah. So once it became my 1 year being a college student, because 3 years have been a baseball player, 1 year I joined a fraternity. It's like, I'm gonna live 4 years of college inside 1 year. Like, I'm going to do that. So I do that, and I meet 2 college buddies of mine, and they say, what are you doing this summer? I go, again, I don't know. Kind of like the junior college thing. I don't know. I'm graduating. Remember, I'm graduating college. I don't know. They say, why don't you join us to go sell books? Why not? Where is it? It's in Nashville, Tennessee. So we come out here, and I spend the summer selling books in North Carolina, and those 2 guys I live with are still very close friends of mine, and it's been a great ride.
And who did you sell books for?
Southwestern Book Company. It is a Nashville icon here in this area.
Man, and you and I both know there are so many successful entrepreneurs today in this town and other places. That's where they got their start. Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that is? It instills in you work ethic. It instills in you the ability to accept rejection. I remember this story when I was about to sell books. I was say 21 years old. I just graduated. I called my mom and I said, Mom, I think I'm going to go sell books. And now you got to remember, hippie generation, all that kind of thing. We never were allowed to kind of answer the door when a solicitor came. Like, it's the establishment, who knows is here. We're not answering the door for it. Like, there's evil people that are knocking on the door. So now I'm going to go sell books. And my mom says, don't go knock on anyone's door. Like, don't. And I go, how did the evil person go from knocking on the door to inside the door at this point? So it was an interesting thing. But book selling is all to do about hard work and the ability to accept rejection.
Yeah, and I think that your sales ability, translates into entrepreneurship significantly. And I don't know any successful entrepreneurs who either themselves don't understand the concepts of sales or have somebody on their immediate leadership team that handles that. I mean, is that your experience as well?
Yeah, and I would say this, Jason, when it comes to sales, it's really this, is if it's the Einstein line. If you can't explain something simply enough, you don't understand it well enough. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people are selling something they don't understand well enough. They haven't taken the time to understand what exactly they're selling, whether it's sales or advice or any of that, whatever that widget is or service is. If you don't understand it well enough, trust me, you're going to complicate with your explanation to the client, whatever it is, and they're not going to buy it, because people buy things they understand. And again, if you can't explain it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough.
So you go from your 4 years of college in 1 year at Oklahoma in your senior year,
right,
and you're selling books that summer leading into that, or is it after your senior year?
So it's right at my senior year.
Okay.
That summer after my senior year.
So you're selling books, you're learning how to take rejection, you're learning how to sell, you're developing your acumen for handling those types of situations. When did law become a part of your story?
So book selling ended because it's a summer job, and I remember I graduated college. I'm selling books, and I did realize early on selling books is not going to be a career. It's going to be a summer.
Yeah.
So I finish and I go back to California, because what else am I going to do? I have no job. I'm a college graduate, but I hadn't thought far enough ahead to maybe I should apply for a job. Like, I hadn't thought that far ahead. Again, it's kind of a progressive approach. So I go back, and baseball wasn't there and sports wasn't there, but I still had a competitive energy about me. So what was going to fill that? So I said, I know what it is. Politics. Seems competitive. It seems to fill that need. I'm going to go do that. Remember, I just come off the book selling, so I've got no fear. I'll knock on any door. It is that kind of thing. And this is 1995, 96. So I go in, I figured, let's go into the governor of California. That's the highest level there is. So I went into the governor's office and I said to the secretary, this is when you could get to that point. I said to the secretary, I'm here to see the governor. And the secretary said, he's not seeing anybody today. And I said, that's fine. I'm going to go sit over in that seat over there and just wait for him to free up for a couple minutes. Well, the secretary realized I wasn't much of a threat and decided to have somebody else come see me. And the person who came see me was one of his legal secretaries, one of his attorneys. The attorney came over to me and started talking to me. I explained in my past. He said, why don't you become an intern for me? I said, great. So I interned for the governor under the legal department. And I was in there and I said, wow, everyone here is an attorney. If I'm going to keep this job, I better become an attorney too. So sure enough, there was a local law school there, and I applied there, and I got in. And the funny thing about that is you have to take the LSAT to go to law school, and I could have gone to any single law school in the country too, but I chose this local law school in Sacramento.
Oh my goodness! So who was the governor then?
Governor Wilson, Governor Pete Wilson.
Okay, all right.
Governor Pete Wilson.
And so how was that relationship with Governor Wilson?
Well, which is interesting. I really had little interaction with him, but he's got a legal staff of 4 attorneys at the time. And the one who kind of gave me the most kind of tutelage at the time, he wasn't that much older than me. He was probably 5-6 years older than me. His dad was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, which again led me to a lot of connections, which I was just going in there to work for the governor. Like they could have put me in the agricultural team, but they put me in the legal team. And then through those connections, that grew, and that's why I met a lot of people through the governor's office.
So you end up getting your Juris Doctorate degree, right?
That's correct.
Yes, so you get your degree, and then are you practicing law, or are you still only working in the political arena as an attorney for the governor's office?
So once you get into the political arena, it's the rooms inside of rooms kind of approach. This is a powerful room, but then there's the room that's another powerful room kind of thing. So the governor's office allowed me to get other opportunities. I got to clerk on 2 different courts of appeal, which is a very sought after position for somebody in law school. I got to work for the United States Attorney's Office for a period of time. So I really started not so much in politics, but in political spots I worked in. So that when I graduated, I had a really good resume, had a very good opportunity, but I wasn't in politics anymore at that point.
So your law degree your law, I guess, stint in law, because you're not practicing law today. Is that correct?
I don't practice today.
So, but how long were you actively in the law world as an attorney?
Yeah, so good question. So I realized really quickly in politics, a lot of fun, a lot of power, they pay you nothing. That's why I really early on, but I had student loans. I had all these law school loans, everything else. I'm like, I can be an attorney here for $32,000 or get a job in Silicon Valley, which is during the dot-com burst, and make a lot more money. So which one do I do? So I said, okay, forget the altruistic avenue. I'm going to go down and make some money. So I joined a company down in Silicon Valley in 2000, 2001 period time frame. And we were responsible for putting video onto the internet. So I tell people all the time, my apologies, I'm the root of all evil. So,
as you watch this on YouTube, right?
Yeah. So I am sorry we did that. But we were kind of at the forefront of all that. Well, it was an awesome opportunity. They paid me a little bit more of base salary, but they gave me all kinds of stock options. And I'm like, gosh, this is awesome. If they vest in the next 2 years, 3 years, this is gonna be great. I'm gonna make so much money. This is gonna be awesome. Well, a little thing happened around 2001. They called it the bubble burst.
Yeah.
And companies were laying off. Well, they're laying off the people that they kept the engineers, they kept the coders, they kept everything else. The 24-year-old attorney, they said, we can outsource that guy. So at that point, they said, keep your stock options. Well, my strike price was at 8 and the stock was going for 4. So I said, the options are worth nothing. So that was kind of my introduction to law, Silicon Valley, and kind of the financial process.
Oh my goodness. So here's what I really like about you is that we've known each other for a while,
yeah.
And I don't know this story. I mean, I know parts of it, but this is very interesting. I think the listeners are going to find it interesting as well. Now, today you don't do law, you don't pitch baseballs, and you're certainly not a hippie, right? So what is it that you're doing today?
Well, I'll give you the next job I did, which kind of leads me to what I did today.
Yeah.
So I was in San Francisco, and I said, okay, I'm not part of in Silicon Valley. I'm going to join a law firm. So I joined a law firm, and the law firm's primary client was the estate of Tupac Shakur.
No kidding.
Yes, the estate of Tupac Shakur. Now, he had, despite what you read, he had passed away, and we had. But you got to think he had a lot of trademarks, a lot of intellectual property out there, and we just had to bird dog all that sort of stuff. And in that role, you would ask questions, just a lot of context questions to the estate, a lot of context, what's going on, and very few was legal questions because you're just getting context to things. And what I found out from that experience was, wow, the average client has like 17 different problems, but I'm legally here to do one. Well, that didn't sit well with me because I'm competitive. I want to solve my clients. So am I going to be an attorney and do the one legal issue you have, or the 17 other problems that you have going on? So I had a why in my road at that point in my career. Am I going to be the attorney that's going to handle the transaction, the lease, the contract, whatever it is? Or am I going to be an advisor that helps you with everything else and kind of punt the law stuff? And at that point, I chose to be an advisor. And that's what led into the Symphony.
Yeah, so your company now is Symphony Advice, and you essentially, based on the way that I understand it in my interaction with you, is that you provide advice in all those, maybe not those 17 areas, but all the areas that a high net worth person or an executive or a business owner is going to need to know, whether that's law or accounting or financial advice, et cetera. You help pull that together like a symphony conductor. So you put all the pieces together in the symphony so that person's life is taken care of on all those areas. Is that the way?
The benefit to me bouncing around so much in my first 25, 30 years of my life was I now have an exposure to a lot of different areas. I wasn't just plugged into an area and said, hey, this is what you're going to be, and then say, hey, I'm an advisor. No, because of my past, like I said, my past has dictated my future at this right now, which is I've got exposure to a lot of different areas, from being in finance to being in business to being in law to those certain areas. I can now know enough of areas to be able to provide advice in all those areas. So the context, the way I like to kind of say it is, listen, we're going to give advice in this little kind of window, kind of like we're going to help a violin player play the violin. But we have no idea if that violin player is off tune, singing with the right song, is with the rest of the symphony until we get them into the entire symphony. So what I try to do is for a client, I say, whatever you're doing, let's see how this makes sense in the entire symphony of whatever you're doing.
Yeah, and as a person who's experienced your services, I can say that it is a refreshing way to take a look at those different aspects, because we entrepreneurs, and like the listeners that are listening, we suffer through pretty unique circumstances, whether it be law or tax issues or estate planning, et cetera, that the average W-2 employee or the average person out there doesn't have to suffer through. So I can vouch for the way that you bring that together, and I think that you're doing a fantastic job. So now let's talk a little bit about the concept of success. From all appearances, from my experience with you as a friend and as someone who knows what you do personally, you're very successful, and you're a very good connector, and you know a lot of people and know good things, and you execute at a high level. I'm asking you, I want you to brag on yourself, but do you consider yourself to be successful? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
When you say the word successful, that gives a connotation. I've reached a certain point, and I don't ever think I've reached anywhere. I live in the moment.
Yeah.
So I don't say I've reached anywhere. Now I certainly feel blessed in the position I'm in. There's that. But I still say we're constantly refining ourselves. And so successful means I've reached a certain point. I think I've had successes, but successful, that's my dad. That's other folks.
Still working on it. Well, according to the dictionary definition of success is achieving a desired outcome. So in some ways, certainly you're successful because you've achieved desired outcomes. You wanted to do X and you did X. You wanted to do Y, you did Y, and you're still working towards those things. And that's the cool thing about entrepreneurialism. When you started Symphony Advice, you had a goal, and you've achieved that goal. But then once you achieved it, you're like, well, I've got another goal I want to do, and I want another. That's kind of the unique plight of an entrepreneur, is that goals grow. Have you noticed that in your own story?
Yeah, I would say this, though. The one thing I have learned, I'm very blessed that I was given this quality, which is I knew my talents, but I was flexible enough to have life steer me in the direction it wanted to steer me. Now, very easily, if I put on a piece of paper, Stanford or Oklahoma, it would not have been a choice. If I said, hey, listen, this job or this job, you would have chosen the other one. But I'm flexible enough to say, in this moment, what makes the most sense without this vision of like, oh my goodness, in 20 years from now, I'll still be doing this, because I don't look at it that way. I go, what is the best decision today? And then I'll make the best decision tomorrow, and then I'll make the best decision the next day.
Well, I think that's really, really good advice from a perspective of someone studying success in entrepreneurs. My questions now are going to lead to these 5 keys that I kind of alluded to in the intro. Is that every entrepreneur that I've interviewed, whether formally like this or informally over a cigar or a glass of whiskey, I asked them questions about, how did you do that? Like, how did you build Symphony Advice to be this amazingly successful advising company for people that you serve? And what I found is that these 5 things show up every time. So I'm going to ask you we'll go through these one at a time. So the first one I find, and probably the most important, is the concept of passion. And when I explain passion, I always have to give some definitions and some qualifiers, because a lot of times when you say passion, people think, well, oh yeah, I have a lot of passion about that, or a passion in that. I love that thing. And that is certainly one side of passion. There was probably a time in your past where law was a passion of yours, or baseball was a passion of yours, or dating, girls was a passion. But passion has another side that really leads to success, and that means that passion means the willingness to endure or suffer. So, for instance, the passion of the Christ didn't mean that Jesus was excited to go to the cross, joyful, looking forward to it, but he was willing to suffer and endure for a greater cause. So in your story, building Symphony Advice to be a very successful firm, an advising firm, can you tell the listeners about how passion as a place where you had to suffer, can you tell us a little story about how that might have played into your story?
Sure. See, we all know the saying, the Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours. We know that saying.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes along with the Bruce Lee saying, he's not worried about somebody that's practiced 10,000 moves. He's worried about the person who's practiced 10,001 kicks, a certain kick. And I would say this, you have to be able to we know the hours, but nobody wants to put in the hours. If you know that to be true, you've got to put in the hours. And when you get to 9,000, they didn't say it's 9,000 hours, they said it's 10,000 hours. You've got to put in the hours to get there. There's no shortcut to that. There's no way around that. And that's when somebody says, if you can't explain it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough, that person hasn't put in the hours because it's still confusing.
So for you as an advisor, the last guy you met with, and I don't know who that is, you're very private, which is rightfully so in what you do. So I have no idea who these people would be. I'm just making this up. But the last person that you met with who's worth gazillions of dollars, and you're helping them figure out all these pieces to the symphony they're trying to make beautiful music to. When did Symphony Advice start? I didn't ask you that question. What year?
16 years ago.
All right, so 16 years ago, day one out of the gate, shingles hung, business cards are printed, ink is drying on the cards. Could you have had a meeting with that guy that day?
Probably,
Okay.
Because I go back to my book selling days, which is my job is to knock on the door and say what I want to say. Now, I probably wouldn't have had the confidence I would have had today. You're probably right about that.
Yeah.
And there's I'm kind of talking about both sides about the 10,000 hours. I still would have had the confidence. Now, it may not be as successful, granted, but you got to have confidence in what you're doing.
Well, and you went through the suffering part of learning how to go through selling books. I'm pretty sure all the times that people slammed the doors at your face, or told you to get off their porch, or called you ugly names. That suffering prepared you for what you're going to do later as a professional advisor, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I tell people this too: is yes, you do have to put in the hours in, but you've got to show up in the arena. You've got to show up in the arena. I tell people all the time. Have you been to a play? And they say, I've been to a play. And I go, did they get every line right in the play? They go, I don't know. I go, because you didn't have the script. I said, be willing to knock on the door. Be willing to make the cold call. Be willing to engage in the meeting. They don't know the script. They don't know what you're supposed to say. But you get in there. Give yourself the at-bats. That's how you get to 10,000 hours.
Yeah, so that's really good advice. And I think that, Theodore Roosevelt had the very famous comment about it's not the person the critic, but it's the one who gets in the arena that we applaud. And I think that's kind of, and I probably butchered the crap out of that, but that's, you listeners get the idea. So the second thing in the keys to success, not only passion, this willingness to endure, and your willingness to put in the 10,000 hours, which I love. By the way, that's from the Outliers book, right? That's right. From Malcolm Gladwell. And if you haven't read any of his stuff, if you're a listener, you really should go read Malcolm. Everything that he read, everything he wrote is fantastic. But the second key to success that I've found in successful entrepreneurs just like you is being at the right place at the right time, right? And so for you, I'm thinking back to the story you told a moment ago, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but right place, right time for you is where the car broke down. Like, had the car gone all the way to Oregon, this story might not have ever happened the way that it did. Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, it's the old luck definition, which is preparation and opportunity. You can constantly look for opportunities and not be prepared, or you can constantly prepare and never have opportunities. But when you prepare and put yourself in the arena for opportunities, you get lucky.
So you're right place, right time in the way that I am just kind of translating your story as an observer. Is the car breaks down in Northern California and you guys set up shop there, life starts, you're throwing rocks at trees, you become a good pitcher, then you go to school. Like all of those things led to the place where you are today. But then there's other places, right place, right time, is that you were at Oklahoma, not Stanford. Like, how different is your life today because Oklahoma happened? Would you have gone to sell books had you been at Stanford? Maybe not. So I think your story, probably just as much as anybody else's, there's plenty of places, but are there others that I don't know about that you can go, that is a place, I was right place, right time, that helped me be successful?
So let me give you a quick story. So this is several years ago. And this is, first of all, my largest client I've ever had, I'm about to tell you about. Several years ago, I wasn't a great public speaker. I could speak in small groups and that kind of thing, but I wasn't a great public speaker, and I wanted to kind of hone my skills a little bit. I was still in California at the time. And I said, I need practice speaking to groups. Okay, how am I going to do that? Like, I don't want to speak to a group because it'll go really bad. So I need to practice on a group. So I had this great idea that I'm going to join the Chamber of Commerce, not in my city, but in a city across town, like a different city's chamber. And I'm going to join them and then have a luncheon there where people can come, free luncheon, and I can speak to them. That's how I'm going to learn to speak. So great. So I set this up, free luncheon, 20 people showed up, 19 of them wanted the free lunch, I'm sure. And I talk about whatever I talked about that day. And I meet a guy in the room, and the guy at a large engineering firm in the Bay Area, and we started doing business, and again, that's my largest client to date. But like a year into it, or 2 years maybe it was, I went back to him, I said, Mike, I said, I know why I was there. Why were you at the Chamber of Commerce luncheon in a city you're like at 2 hours away from you? Why were you there? And he says, well, I didn't know how to get involved in group meetings, and it was the first year, and I figured I'd try a Chamber of Commerce in a city I'm not involved in. I tell that story to say, you got to show up. You got to put in the hours. You got it's preparation and opportunity to get decisions like that. And there's many of those where it's the right place at the right time, but it's because you're prepared and you put yourself out there.
Listen, so many people misunderstand the concept of networking. What you did that day, a lot of people would misclassify as low-level networking. Chambers of Commerce are notorious, have a bad reputation for that. I have had very good experience with chambers, as have you, for different reasons. But there are a lot of people that look at that and go, that's terrible, that's a crappy networking. But the thing is, they misunderstand that work is actually in the word. Network, you have to do something. You did something. You put yourself in a place where it actually turned into be success for you. Like, had you not been there, it wouldn't have happened.
I'll also say this when it comes to that is check your ego at the door. We used to do this thing, my two buddies of book selling, where we did this dance in the parking lot. In an open parking lot, we did a dance. Now, that's not humiliating, but remember, we're going to go sell books door to door, so I don't know which one's more humiliating. But the point being is this, we all don't check ourselves, check our ego, and we think something's too low for us or doesn't meet to our standards. I never would have been at that Chamber of Commerce. I never would have got my largest client. I never think I'm too good for any room or any situation.
That's great. The place where you were being a Chamber of Commerce meeting, but you put yourself in that place is very fascinating. The third P in my kind of these P's of success, 5 keys of success, is people. And I think that most of the time, I think even the listeners would agree that everybody can point to a person or persons, could be multiple people, that had those people or that person not intersected their life would be completely different. And it's kind of the George Bailey effect, right? I mean, if you've watched the movie It's a Wonderful Life, which is one of my favorite movies, you've got this guy named George Bailey who grew up in this little town in Bedford Falls, and he's having a hard time. The little building and loan he has is about to go under. It's going to be called by the bank. He's contemplating suicide, and an angel comes and says, don't do this. Let me show you what life would be like if you didn't exist. And man, it was completely different. The town's name was different, etc. So is there a George Bailey in your life? Like, is there a person that you can point to and go, had I not met that guy or that woman or been at this place with these people, I wouldn't be the success I am today?
Well, my dad is first on the list, but I'll give you a second story. I was a little boy, I'll say 8 years old. I'm going to make a number. Something like that, 8, 9, 10. And my dad would take me once a year to a baseball game. And we went down to watch the San Francisco Giants play Candlestick Park, back when there was Candlestick. And I'd get right to the rim. I'd make him be there 5 hours early, whatever, because we got to go to one game. I wanted to be there, whatever. So we're there early in the game. I'm on the railing. And I see a guy named Dusty Baker out there. And I think he was at the end of his career at this point. And I yelled to him, Mr. Baker, Mr. Baker. And he comes over and I want him to sign something. And he actually took his batting gloves off he was wearing and signed those and gave me those. And I was, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So as a little boy, I went back to my seat and I sat down and my dad says, you know what you do for somebody who does something nice? I go, what's that? He goes, you write him a thank you note. I go, okay. So I went home. So I'm 8 or 9 years old. So this is 1981, 82, we'll say. And I wrote to San Francisco Giants, Dusty Baker, thank you very much for signing these batting gloves. San Francisco, California. I had no address. I'd sent it off. About a month later, 2 months later, the phone rings. Again, I'm 9 years old, or 8, whatever it was. And my mom says, Jason, the phone is for you. And I got the phone. And sure enough, it was Dusty Baker talking to me about thank you for the note. You're welcome. And I mean, I didn't say a word. He was probably like, are you going to say something? I was just stunned. Long story short is Dusty called me about every month, and he's one of my closest friends to this day. The point is never miss those little opportunities to say thank you to people. Never miss those opportunities. And what Dusty did for me is he recognized a young man. He recognized somebody, and he poured into me. And that just told me, hey, listen, when you meet people, pour into them. You don't know what that means to that person. So Dusty, my dad, that story kind of always stuck with me.
That's fantastic, and I've heard it. I remember you telling me part of that story at some time in the past, and you were the person that introduced me to Dusty. And I remember talking to him on the phone one time and going, I can't believe I'm talking to Dusty Baker. So that's phenomenal. So that's a great story. So how did you said Dad was first? And I see Dad in that story where he did that, but is there something else about your dad that helped get you to where you are besides, hey, you got to send that thank you note?
Yeah, my dad still has an incredible ability to prioritize things. Incredible ability. He knew that his marriage was first. He knew kids. He knew where business ranked, and that he had an incredible ability to prioritize things. And I'll tell you a story. This is 5-6 years ago, maybe less. I had an office very close to my house, and during the day, my wife and 2 kids would come over and see me at the office, and I'd play around with them. It was awesome to see all the kids. And then work would get over, and then I'd go home, and I'd see them, and I'd kind of check up on work email and things like that. And I thought, wait a minute. When I'm at work, I'm distracted, and when I'm home, I'm distracted. This makes no sense. My dad would never do this. And so I just came up with the thing that my dad would always say, be 100% present 100% of the time. So, and I think a lot of things is if we are 100% present, not lukewarm in the moment, but 100% present 100% of the time, amazing things can be done.
Yeah, well, I can definitely say as someone who knows you, that is in fact who you are, and your dad has instilled that very successfully in you. The fourth P of success that I talk about is that of preparation. And preparation means, the way I mean it is that you've got to be prepared and have the know-how to pull off what it is you're going to do. So, for example, you are now an advisor to some pretty powerful and wealthy individuals, executives, et cetera, and you do a very good job of helping them in some pretty sensitive areas of their life. But they're not going to hire just any dude who calls them, who shows up, and no matter how persistent they are, they're not going to hire anybody to do that, because you're looking into some very personal things, financials, estate planning, which gets into a lot of private areas. So how did you prepare to become the successful advisor that you are today?
I think it started early on when I was an attorney. I was in one of the law firms early on when I was actually still a law student. I was in the litigation department. And the head litigator asked me, he goes, how would you approach a deposition? I go, I don't know. How should I approach a deposition? He goes, what would you say? And I would say, well, I'd ask the guy if he did it. He goes, well, you wouldn't do that. Would you ask him his name? And then he goes, I tell you what, when you go on a date, do you ask the person to marry? Is that your first question? Will you marry me? Or do you get to know them? I said, yeah, I get to know them. He says, in asking questions, there's an arc and a story to asking questions. Because if you ask one question at the beginning of the conversation and you ask that same question at the end, you might get two different answers. If you can understand the ability to ask questions like a deposition, you'll be very successful in garnering information. So what I practice and honed and prided myself in is the ability to ask the right questions to people. Because if you get the right questions, you'll get answers and it'll reveal things that they weren't normally going to do. And then based on that, trust can be developed. So if you just ask people constantly, how are you doing today? How are you doing today? How are you doing today? You're only going to get skin deep. And that person will never trust you because you're just at skin level. It's the ability to ask really good questions to get in to know the person that garners trust in them and you.
So that's really good, and I 100% believe that the better questions lead to better answers, and you're never going to know what you want to know if you don't learn how to ask questions. And so I see that in you, and I completely get that that's what's led to the success.
You know, I'll say, people will always say to me, well, how do I get to the questions? And I say, whatever question you want to ask, go 3 years back in that story. Like if you want to say, how did you become to Symphony Advice? You don't just ask them how they got there. You say, hey, what were the years leading up to that? And we so badly want to know the answer to our question we really want to ask, we forget the groundwork and foundation needs to be laid prior to that question.
That's right. That's exactly right. The fifth P to this idea that I've got, this theory about these 5 Ps of success, is that a plan. And most of the time when I mention that without any explanation, people immediately think I mean business plan. So they may say, okay, well, yeah, when I started Symphony Advice 16 years ago, I wrote a business plan, blah, blah, blah. Well, that may or may not have contributed to success in many people's stories, but more often than not, I find that most successful entrepreneurs I know don't have written business plans. So what I mean by plan, when I mention plan, is I'm talking about financial resources, and I'm talking about specifically the ability to obtain and deploy those resources so that you can be successful. As an advisor, your need for resources, and help me correct my ignorance, but as an advisor, your need for resources really is just ongoing supporting costs of staying in business. It's not you don't have COGS, you're not cost of goods sold. Mm-hmm. You don't have a product necessarily that's your product you had to create to sell. You're really having you've got intellectual things that you're sharing with people and connecting. So it may or may not have required a ton of resources for you to start. So tell us how, and the listeners here, what plan did you have to obtain resources to get Symphony Advice off the ground and be successful?
You got to have a really clear idea where you're going, and you have a really clear idea what you're good at. People will invest and people will give resources when they have a really clear idea what you're doing. Now, it's like anything else. I take it always to the dating principle. If you are somebody that's acting like somebody you're not, nobody will want to marry you. It's when you become to act like the person you are that people will find interest in you. I said that's the principle you need to do. It's when you become really clear about who you are, where you're going, and what you're good at, then people will come to ask resources. You're not the flashy.com if you're not the flashy.com. You don't need the neon kind of sofa and everything if that's not you. Be who you are and people will find you out.
That's really good. So if an entrepreneur is sitting down with you and they're saying, okay, look, Jason, I'm starting out, I know you're an advisor to these high net worth people. These entrepreneurs are already successful and they're making a lot of money, but hey, I'm just getting started. What piece of advice, or maybe a couple pieces of advice, would you give to that person starting out, knowing what you know now as a successful entrepreneur?
What do you do really well? What do you do really well? What do you do better than anyone else? And let's have a narrative around that. And whatever that is, I don't care. I've got people wanting to buy window washing companies. If you're the best window washer, we want to have a conversation with you. I have people that are involved in sheet metal. I have people involved in restaurants, hotels. What are you good at? They all want to buy what you're really good at. But the problem is, if you don't know what you're good at, how are they supposed to find that out for you? What are you good at? So
what if somebody says, I don't know? What do you do with that?
Ask people around you that you trust. I'll say this in a different direction. I have a client who invests, and how they invest is they will always ask me, "Did you invest?" They don't do due diligence. They've got a couple trusted people and they will say, did you invest? And if they invest, they'll invest. The point being is you may not know what you're good at. Find the people who know you best. They'll tell you what you're good at.
Yeah. Well, I want to say this, and not everybody who sits across the table from me do I know as well as I think I know you. But I've learned so much today in our conversation that I didn't know. But I will say this, and this is for your own edification. I may say all this, and you go, I don't want that in there. But I'm going to tell you, you are such an impressive person. Like, and I'm not blowing smoke here, although I was smoking a cigar earlier. I'm not blowing smoke right now. When you and I met, and I'll tell this story for the listener's sake, we were sitting at a table at a breakfast. It was a networking breakfast that we were at. And again, it goes back to networking, right place, right time. And you ended up being, not only were you at the right place at the right time, and was I, but we also hopefully were the right people for each other for different parts of our lives, because you handed me your business card and we were talking, and it said Symphony on it, and I thought you were with the Symphony here in Nashville. And you're like, no. And you explained it. But that led to a coffee meeting at Starbucks, and then I happened to be studying about some particular investing things, and you started asking me questions, and it just, my life is, I can honestly say this, my life is in a different place because I know Jason Weiss. Had we not met that day at that networking. And I don't know if it's as dramatic as you meeting that guy at that chamber thing, but I think that it might be, because you've introduced me to so many amazing people. You've helped me with so many amazing things on my own life. So I'm saying this for the benefit of the listeners and for you. I really want you to know how much I appreciate you. And I don't think I've told you that enough. And now I'm doing it publicly on the podcast here. But hearing this story makes me even more impressed. Like, I think you're a very impressive individual. So I knew you were successful, but now I get a lot better picture. And I hope the listeners are appreciating this. So how can listeners get in touch with Jason Weiss?
I believe we have a link through our website, and that's the best way to kind of get through to me.
All right.
Our contact us page is there, and that's kind of the best way right now.
And that's symphonyadvice.com. That's Symphony, just exactly what it is, symphonyadvice.com. You can go to his website. You can log in there. If there's a contact, you can reach out to Jason that way. He doesn't participate in all other social media. He's way too busy of a man to not be distracted by those other things. He's got too much else going on with his family and all the other stuff that's happening. So, well, Jason, is there anything that I didn't ask, or something you wanted to say specifically in regards to success, or anything else before we close the conversation?
No, but I would say is whenever you start a business, it seems like the elephant is in front of you. You've got so much to do, and but just remember that famous line, just one bite. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's even for people with so much going on. And I'd even say this, I say this to my wife, three little kids, is we're not going to solve everything today, but if we can solve one thing and take the elephant with one bite, we'll get there eventually.
That's great advice. Well, there you have it, everybody. We've looked at yet another successful entrepreneur, and Jason Weiss has given us his story about how these 5 Ps have played a part in his story of success as a Colorado Rockies and Oklahoma baseball pitcher, as a bookseller, as an attorney, a law clerk, and now as the proprietor, CEO, and founder of Symphony Advice, working as an advisor for a lot of amazing people. So his success story started with passion, and there was a right place at right time, and there was right people in his story. He prepared well, and he had a plan. So if you are interested in knowing how you can be successful, just like Jason and the other guests have been, there is a way to understand that probability, and it is through a 5 Ps of success assessment. You can get this and download it for free on my website at therealjasonduncan.com/success. So it's therealjasonduncan.com/success. You go to the website, you can download the 5 Ps of success assessment. It is 100% free. And when you complete the assessment, it'll give you a personalized report that gives you your odds or probability of success with regard to a specific venture. So you'll have to fill out like what your venture is, what you're trying to accomplish. And here's what people tell me when they take the assessment. They say, well, if it comes back with low probability, well, then here's what that means. That doesn't mean you can't be successful. It just means that thing that you're in might not work. Just like what Jason Weiss said a moment ago, is that, hey, find out what you're really good at. Well, you may have a great idea, but you don't have the ability to execute it. The 5 Ps of success assessment will help you identify that. So in the like manner, it's going to tell you what you shouldn't pursue, but it'll also help you get clarity on what you should pursue. So go to therealjasonduncan.com/success, download that assessment. And I also occasionally do, about once every 6 weeks or so, I do a 5-day challenge with anybody who wants to sign up for that. That does cost a little bit of money, but that 5-day challenge is 5 back-to-back-to-back days with a whole group of people where we go through that, not only that assessment, but we dive deeper into the concepts of the 5 Ps so that you know how to apply those to your life as an entrepreneur and a business leader. I want to thank you, C-Suite Network, for syndicating this. I want to thank you to Joshua Sterling Smith and the Standard here in Nashville for hosting us here in the Matador Room. This has been another fantastic episode of The Root of All Success with me, the real Jason Duncan. I will see you on the next episode, or you'll hear my voice on your podcast player on the next episode. And until then, remember, Jesus is King.
Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we invite you to visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Take charge of your business. Grow it from great to incredible. Join us again next time here on The Root of All Success.